Hello lovely people, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag. So I've written down a bunch of questions and let's just get started. This is all about the books I've read between January and June of 2022. So first let's go over stats on Storygraph. I'm just gonna screen record, slide over a bit so we can put it up there. All right, so first of all, I reached my reading goal of 25 books already. I'm at 27. Yay! Very, very pleased about that. Next, in terms of moods, the most that I've read is lighthearted or emotional, and the least of the ones I've read is challenging, that I consider challenging or tense. In terms of pace, mostly medium paced, then slow, then fast, which is interesting because I would have thought I would read more fast-paced books, but I guess not. Or maybe my judgment of what's fast is off. Page count, 50% of the books I've read so far were between 300 and 499 pages. That doesn't surprise me. That is the sweet spot for my reads. 7% were over 500 and 41% was less than 300. Then in terms of fiction and nonfiction, yeah, 81% was fiction. That doesn't surprise me either because I've been trying to read more nonfiction, but I have not been successful. And then in terms of genres, romance is the most with 12, and then contemporary and LGBTQ and fantasy are tied. Interesting, okay. For format, I don't really know how it determines this. 67% print and 33% digital. I don't really know how it knows. Then we have my two most read authors of the year are Sarah J. Maas and Katya Rose, because I read 2 of each of their books. And then my overall star rating was 4.9, which is great. I think that's a really good reading year so far. If I would want anything, it would be to be on the 4-star and up side of my average rating, so that's great. Now let's jump into the questions. I'm not gonna hold up the books because otherwise it was gonna make a huge mess of my house, so I will just put them on the screen. But the first question is the best books you've read this year so far. So I have 3. The first one is Cultish by Amanda Montell. This is a nonfiction all about cults and the everyday world and everyday cults that you might not think would be considered a cult, but they have they use the same language and the same tendencies. It was all about language and cults. This was my first read of the year and it's one of my favorites so far. The second is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I absolutely loved this book. I think it's one of my favorite reads of all time. The world just transported me away and I loved the plot and the characters were so well thought out and unique. So that would be my second favorite of the year. And my third favorite is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This was a super pleasant surprise for me. It was my first Taylor Jenkins Reid book and I just fell in love with Evelyn Hugo and the world and anything 1920s, anything early Hollywood, it for me just seals the deal. So I loved it and I loved Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing and I'm definitely going to read more. Best sequel you've read so far? Well, I think I've only read 2 sequels this year and they were both 5 stars, or let's consult the notebook. 4.5 and 1 was 5, but I loved both of them. So the first one is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. This is the sequel to the Crescent City series, A House of Earth and Blood. I read this the month that it came out and I absolutely loved it. I loved it more than the first one, I think. I split it between audio and physical and I just absolutely loved it and I gave it 4.5 stars. I think Crescent City is probably my favorite series so far from her, although I do love the ACOTAR series, and I have not read Throne of Glass. But that was one. And then the other one was the Hawthorne Legacy by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, which is the sequel to the Inheritance games, another series I absolutely love. The Hawthorne Legacy was fantastic. I actually think it was better than the first one, but I gave the first one 5 stars, so I had to give this one 5. It really fleshes out the characters more. It gives more to the mystery and more to the plot, which I just love, and I love the characters so much. We'll talk about them a little bit later. But yeah, hands down, one of the best books I read this year and one of the best sequels that I read. Question, new release you haven't read but want to. Okay, there's a couple on here. So one is Beautiful Fools by, shoot, I should have pulled this up. One moment, please. Okay, one is Beautiful Little Fools by Gillian Cantor. I bought this right when it came out and I've yet to manage to fit it on a TBR, but this is a Great Gatsby retelling following Daisy, Jordan, and another girl after Gatsby is found dead in his pool and after the car accident. And it kind of like is like a mystery, and it kind of, they're all pulled back into his kind of orbit. If you are new here, I love The Great Gatsby. It is my favorite book of all time, and I've been trying to read a bunch of retellings, and I have not liked any of them so far, so I have high hopes for this because it's the closest to the original story that I have been able to find so far. And yeah, so that one's really high on my list. And the other one is Hotel Magnifique, which again, I'll mention later in this video, but this one's by Emily J. Taylor. This one is about, very similar to The Night Circus. It's for fans of The Night Circus, and it is about a traveling hotel and the girls who work there. So this sounds super cool to me as well. And again, I bought it right when it came out, and I just have not managed to get it on the TBR yet. It's quite a lot longer than Beautiful Little Fools, but those are definitely the two that I need to get to. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year. The first one that comes to mind is Cake Eater, which is the story of Marie Antoinette, but set in 3000 something. I'm just flipping through to my list of new releases that I want to read, and it just sounds fascinating to me. She's like an influencer. I just can't wait for that one to come out, and the last time I checked, it was coming out on August 9th. And then I think the only other one that's coming out that late that I had written down from before is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. I don't know what this is about, but Ashley Winstead is kind of like an auto-buy author for me now, because she wrote In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, which was one of my favorite books of last year. So she's just an auto-buy for me, and I'm really excited for another thriller from her. Biggest surprise. Okay, so I have a couple, well, let's see. I would say I have two biggest surprises. One was Yoke by Mary H.K. Choi. I read that last month. You can see it in the reading wrap-up from last month, but I had no hope. I didn't know anything really about the book. Like, I'd heard of it, but I didn't really have any hopes going into it of it being great, and it was one of the best reads of the year. I loved it. Another one along those lines was Black Buck, which is also a book club read, which I didn't have any concept of before, and I absolutely loved that one. I think it's a great read. It's about sales, and it's about a man who works in sales. It's a satire of the modern world about Black men, and it's just so, I suppose the only other thing that I would say is the House of Earth and Blood series as a whole. It never appealed to me. I would see it in stores and I was like, this is just way too long. I have zero interest in it, but I picked it up right before the sequel and I absolutely love it. It is very rare that in that type of book the main character is somebody that I like, and I love Bryce, and she's one of my favorite characters ever, so that was a very pleasant surprise. And the last one would be The Queen of the Tierling, the first book in the Tier series. My mom read this one, and it was her pick for me last month for mom picks, for the mom pick thing on my TBR, and I really liked it. It was a great fantasy, really compelling, and I can't wait to read the next couple books, and we'll talk about that a little later as well. Next, favorite new author. Okay, so my favorite new author is Katya Rose. She writes queer romance novels. The two that I read from her this month were Catch and Cradle, which was the first one. Loved it. It is a queer lacrosse romance, and the second one that I read was The Devil Wears Tartan, which was a new release of hers this year, and that is about Highland dance, enemies to lovers. Most of her books are enemies to lovers, which that is my favorite trope, so I'm here for it. And I'm just about to read her new book. I don't remember the title right now, but it is being released at the end of the month, so I got an arc for that. I love her writing. I love her characters. They're just really sweet and quick reading books, and yeah, I would highly recommend. Newest fictional crush. Okay, so I guess we'd have to put Rune Danon from the Crescent City series. He's probably the most crush level person from that book for me. I really like him. I like his vibes, and he seems like a fun guy, and yep. I think I'd probably also say Bryce on that list though too. She's just like so cool to me, and I just think that she's like a great main character, and I love how like badass she is, and she just kind of like does what she wants. Sometimes it makes me really angry, but that's okay. In addition to that, I would say, oh yes, this is where the Hawthorne Legacy book comes in. Any of the Hawthorne brothers, but specifically Grayson and Jameson, perfection. I picture them as Timothy Chalamet, and like that's good enough for me. I love them. I love how mysterious they are. And then the newest one, I guess, would be, why can't I not remember his name? He is in the Tierling series. The Fetch. So he is at this point in the series very mysterious. He wears a mask except when he's around the main character. Nobody knows who he actually is, and whenever they see him without a mask on, he kills them, and they always go like, oh, you're still alive. Like, I'm just so excited to find out who he is, but he's very mysterious. But I really like how he just like looked after the main character, and he's very protective over her. So 10 out of 10 new crush. I'm very excited to learn more about him. All right, next question while the camera's still going. Book that made you cry. Okay, so there were a few, but the most recent one was Yoke. The ending just really got me, but I don't want to like spoil anything, so just know the ending made me cry a lot. But I was also in a vulnerable place when I read it, so that's probably partly why. Also, I think that in a different sense of the way, the 21 Things You Didn't Know About the Indian Act made me sad, but because of the state of the world, not because of the writing, because it's so to the point about how things are and the truths about how Indigenous people in this country are living, and that made me really sad because it's horrible. Book that made you happy. I mean, a lot of books have made me happy. I think The Night Circus is definitely the first one that came to mind because I just like hugged the book afterwards. Same with The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, because I just loved both of them so much. They just transported me to these like new, like these different worlds, but not in the way that often big giant fantasy books do, where there's a whole new world you have to learn. Like, these two are very much set, I guess probably urban fantasy for The Night Circus, and then just like a historical fiction for The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So they were just really easy to fall into without having to kind of like memorize the different locations of things. It's a beautiful book you got this year. This one is definitely Hotel Magnifique by Emily J. Taylor. Just like look at that beautiful, stunning cover. I would have bought it regardless of what the book is about because it's just absolutely stunning. Books do you need to read by the end of the year? I have a list in here of my TBR, of my own TBR, and I definitely have made very little progress on that. I made a video about it as well, but yeah, I'm just like not off to a good start. Here we go. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 books left that I'd like to read. Kind of like priorities for me on that list would be Malibu Rising, after how much I loved Taylor Jenkins Reid's The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. That's probably the priority for me from that original physical TBR, but then additionally, I would really like to read History of the Wild Places, because that is a new book that I also bought the end of last year and I haven't gotten to it yet, and it's about cults, which I love. I love cults. So there's a lot, too many books, such little time, but those are probably the three that I'd really like to get to. Also Hotel Magnifique. Definitely is a new purchase since I made that list, but it's definitely one that I really need to. And now we're moving into some additional questions that I found on It's Belle's channel. So a book that lived up to the hype. I think, again, these would be The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and The Night Circus. These were quite hyped up for me, but I absolutely adored them. Also Crescent City, like I really ended up liking that series and I did not think that I was gonna like that. Next, books that did not live up to the hype. I have two specifically. One of them is She Who Became the Sun by, I think it's over here, by Shelley Parker Chan. This one was a book club pick as well. I had heard really good things about it. People are still hyping it up and I DNF'd it halfway through and I did not enjoy it. It was not compelling. The characters were forgettable. The main character wasn't interesting. And I think the story just took too long to get to the point. So that was definitely not for me. And then the other one that I'm reading right now is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. This one was super hyped up on TikTok and everyone I know who's read it absolutely loved it. And I don't dislike it, but it's definitely putting me into a bit of a slump. I'm probably gonna end up giving it 3 stars. Just a basic romance in my opinion, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm over halfway done. So yeah, it's a no from me. It's a no from me. Biggest accomplishment read would definitely be reading House of Sky and Breath as quickly as I did. Usually a book like that would take me a month and a bit to read, and I believe I read it in about 2 weeks or a week and a half, which is just insane. But the combination of the audiobook and reading it physically really helped with that. But before this year, I was really daunted by books of that size. I still don't love books of that size, but now it doesn't feel like it's an insurmountable read at all. So I'm very proud of myself for getting those 2 done, especially so close to. New favorite character. I talked about this a little bit, but I would probably say, I don't know. Why did I not think about an answer to this prompt? I'd probably say Bryce Quinlan for this, which just seems like a stupid answer, but it's true. Like, I was shocked to like her as a character because I really dislike Feyre, the main character of the ACOTAR series. So I would say her, and then maybe Evelyn Hugo. Least favorite character, probably either Michael from The Kiss Quotient or Maya from the Multiverse of Madness, or the unnamed narrator from Kill Them All. That book was just a disaster in itself, so it just wasn't for me. But Michael, I talked about this last week, he just completely let me down. He went from being this like cute family guy to being like super possessive and aggressive towards the main character, wanting her to change, like all this stuff. I really just didn't like him and I did not like the book. And then again, I talked about this last week, but Mother of Madness was just horrible and I did not like the main character, but I also wasn't really able to get to know her because the art wasn't very good and the writing was bad. So that was just a complete fail, that whole book. Next up, we have most shocking book or moment. Well, I would say like half of Crescent City and the House of Sky and Breath were like the most shocking moments. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but there were a ton of reveals at the end of House of Sky and Breath. Literally the epilogue itself is probably the biggest shock of the entire, like, of any series I've ever read. So if you know, you know. My camera turned off. I think this is where we were, but there's no other moment. That's it. Next we have book I want the most people to read, and I'm gonna go down the nonfiction route for this. So Cultish is a great one, and I think that it's really important for people to understand that it's not just stupid people who end up in cults. They are persuasive and they capitalize on things that the other people really want to hear, and I think that that's really crucial in the world right now, where there's a lot more people turning towards white supremacy, QAnon, other cults like that, and also cultish brands which also use the same kind of language, whether it's as detrimental or not. If you're interested and you don't want to read the book right away, check out Amanda's podcast, Sounds Like a Cult. One of my favorite podcasts ever, and she talks about like different brands like Trader Joe's, Soul Cycle, and then basically tells you like, should you be concerned if you're a part of this, or are you okay? And they just use that kind of language. So I think that's really important. And then the second book would be Willful Blindness. This book is all about how we actively don't see things that are happening to us and to the world. And it was super eye-opening to me. I like tabbed so much of that book. I really liked it, and I think it's really important for people to read to kind of, you know, think about how you're thinking about things. So those would be my two nonfiction recommendations. And then in terms of fiction, I guess just The Night Circus. One of my favorite books of all time. That's all. The world is so freaking magical, and I just wish I could go to the Night Circus. So the funniest book was probably For Aunties and a Wedding, the sequel to Dial A for Aunties. If you've read Dial A for Aunties, you know that it's just like a comedy of errors, and it's hilarious. The aunties are hilarious. This book is a little more embarrassing, as I mentioned earlier, but it still has that same like funny and ridiculous aspect. More questions left. Any books you would reread? I think, like, I wish that I wouldn't have to say this, but I think by the time the next Crescent City book comes out, I will need to reread House of Sky and Breath, just because there were so many things, and I think a lot of things I missed in my first read. It's gonna be a long one, but I think that I would enjoy a reread of that. And in a few years I'll probably reread The Night Circus. And the only other one that I haven't mentioned yet would be No One's Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, and I would reread this when I purchase it so I can annotate it. I had the library copy before, and I want to purchase it and reread it and annotate everything because I stickied so many things in the library book. So those would be the three. And then lastly, any upcoming sequels that you want to read. So I'm really bad and I'm stuck on A Court of Mist and Fury from ACOTAR. That one just really needs to get done by the end of the year, maybe even the entire series, because I know my friends just really want me to get to that one, A Court of Frost and Starlight and A Court of Silver Flame. So I'm hoping I'll be able to move through the rest of that series. And then I really want to pick up the next book in the Queen of the Cheerling series, because I really liked the first one and I would love to get some answers for the second one. And the only other thing I can think of in terms of a new release would be the Something Gambit, which is the third and final Hawthorne Legacy, or the Hawthorne series book, and that comes out at the end of August. So I think the Final Gambit is what it's called. So I would really like to read that, but I feel like I'll also end up putting off reading it because it's the last book of the series and I don't want the series to be over. This is my constant dilemma and why I never finish content, so we'll see. But those are all of the questions from the mid-year freakout tag, all the stats, everything that you might want to know. Let me know in the comments down below what your most anticipated read of the second half of the month or year is, because I need to add some more to my list. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll leave the accounts that I've seen do this down below. I'm not sure who the first one was, but I'll leave them linked down below. So don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and hit that subscribe button. Follow me on all of my social media down below as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!